all recognise, given the gravity of the current situation. They've also organised an emergency picket tomorrow night at 6 p.m. outside Downing Street, and we'll be advertising other things during the evening that you can do to get involved and to support the campaign. The NEU, as along with many trade unions, actually has issued a statement. I'm just going to start by reading our statement out because I think it summarises what I would have been saying anyway in my opening remarks. It says the NEU condemns unequivocally the abduction and removal to the USA of Venezuelan President Maduro and his wife by the USA administration. This act of aggression and the wave of military attacks, including the bombardment of Caracas, which preceded it, constitute a blatant breach of international law. We uphold the right of the Venezuelan people alone to determine their elected leaders and the future of their country. And I think that is key for us in the trade union movement, but also in wider civil society. We have a great lineup of speakers that you'll be hearing from tonight, and I'm sure they will update you further about the situation and things that you can do, but also they will be able to talk about their own sort of experiences and what they have been campaigning around. So I'm going to move straight to our first speaker because we have got quite a few and we're going to aim to try and finish this in an hour. So our first speaker is Richard Bergen, MP. I'm sure everybody knows Richard very well, very outspoken on a number of international issues, but also on issues here in the UK as well. So he's a fantastic MP. Thank you for taking time to join us this evening, Richard.
Thanks very much, Louise. And first of all, well done to everyone who's organised this emergency online rally tonight and the emergency picket at Downing Street tomorrow, because anyone who cares about human rights and international law must condemn Donald Trump's military attack on Venezuela and must condemn his kidnapping of its president. We must speak out against this disgraceful, illegal, and dangerous US regime change operation against a sovereign nation. It is wholly unjustified. It's a clear violation of international law, and whatever excuses or lies are used to justify it, it is about control of Venezuela's oil, the largest proven oil reserves in the world. What we're witnessing now is a new form of US gangster politics, where might is right. It's Trump's version of the naked colonialism of the past. Today, the immediate focus is Venezuela, but this is only the first step in a much wider strategy. This is not just a grab for Venezuela's oil, though of course it is that. It's a power grab aimed at reasserting US control over the entire region. And as President Lula of Brazil highlighted, it's part of a broader strategy of US violence and control, not only in Latin America, but all across the world. Trump's national security strategy, published at the end of last year, makes all of this completely explicit. In Europe, it's caused great alarm because it openly signals support for installing far-right governments. And it's crystal clear that Latin America is once again to be treated as nothing more than a US colony. Trump's strategy that the US will, and I quote, reassert and enforce the Monroe Doctrine to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere. That means total US control over Latin America's resources, geography, and security. We already see Colombia and Mexico being bullied and threatened, and Cuba is clearly in their sights. And we know Trump has amassed huge military forces across the Caribbean while pushing for new military bases and military agreements elsewhere in the region. What Trump is trying to do is to reverse decades of progress in Latin America. Over the last 20 plus years, progressive governments known as the Pink Tide were elected. These were governments committed to national sovereignty, governments that took control of their own natural resources and used them to invest in healthcare, education, and public services. Governments that prioritised regional integration, trading with each other for mutual benefit rather than existing solely to serve US interests. Governments that built relationships with the wider world, Europe, Africa, India, China, and beyond. None of this is acceptable to Trump. He sees it as a threat to US domination and he wants to put an end to it. But we need to be clear. This strategy will meet mass opposition across Latin America. People there, like people everywhere, do not want to be treated as a colony and controlled in the interests of a superpower. And so we must be deeply alarmed by what Trump's plans imply, because historically, US domination in Latin America has meant pro US dictatorships. It has meant paramilitary death squads. It has meant the crushing of democratic freedoms and systematic human rights abuses. We saw all of that in the 1970s and the 1980s when hundreds of thousands of lives were lost. We must not allow that history to be repeated. So I say this directly to governments across Europe, including our own, and including our own Prime Minister, who gave Trump a green light yesterday with weak and pathetic statements. You must stand up to Trump, oppose his gangster politics, because he will not stop unless that happens. The statement from our Prime Minister yesterday was shameful and reckless. It will only embolden Trump further. The Prime Minister should have responded to an illegal bombing and kidnapping by Trump in exactly the way he would have done if Putin had carried it out. Either Keir Starmer believes in international law or he doesn't. You can't pick and choose. Instead, international law is being cast aside to appease Donald Trump. We saw it with Gaza, and now we are seeing it again with Venezuela. That's why it's so important that we're here tonight. And that's why we must step up to this new, very dangerous moment in history. We must organise, protest, and resist. So, no war on Venezuela, no to Trump's gangster politics, and yes to international law.
Thanks very much for that, Richard. A really good opening to this evening's online rally. We have hundreds of people online listening now from up and down the country here, but also from different parts of the globe. So we know this is a very important issue for people in the UK here, but also globally. So our next speaker is Sophie Bolt. She's one of the co-organisers of tonight's online rally, but also the demonstration tomorrow. She's the General Secretary of CND. You're very welcome, Sophie. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to be here at such an important and critical time. So I send solidarity greetings from the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. You know, we are absolutely horrified by the actions of the Trump administration and condemn them outright. Trump's military attacks on Venezuela and the kidnapping of the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, are in total breach of international law. You know, Venezuela has in no way threatened or carried out threats against the US. This is totally unprovoked attack on a sovereign country. And if anyone was in any doubt about Trump's real motivations for the attacks and abduction of Maduro, which have absolutely nothing to do with drug trafficking, his, I think, chilling press conference yesterday made it absolutely clear. This is about regime change so the US can get control of Venezuela's oil reserves, as we know, the largest in the world. And as Trump puts it, extract a tremendous amount of wealth. These illegal actions follow months of extrajudicial killings of over 100 people, alongside this huge military buildup on Venezuela's coast by the US, including nuclear-capable B-52 long-range bombers that have been making flights from the US to the Venezuelan coast. This deadly kind of military hardware is now being used to effectively threaten war on the people of Venezuela if they do not submit to the US. So the entire population is being held to ransom. Now, Trump's illegal actions have profound implications, not just for the people of Venezuela, but for the wider Latin American continent and beyond. We know that Marco Rubio has already hinted that Cuba could be next. Trump has made this absolutely explicit in his national security strategy, which states that the US needs to restore its preeminence in the world, including in the Western Hemisphere, so the US can assert ourselves confidently where and when we need in the region. And here he is carrying that out right now. It is yet again the US using the threat of its overwhelming military might, including, of course, its nuclear weapons, to attempt or secure regime change against countries who refuse to subordinate their country's sovereignty and their natural resources to the US. And we have seen how horrific the consequences of this have been. Devastating consequences of US military intervention in Latin America, and of course the horrors of US attempts at regime change and occupation in Afghanistan, Iraq and Libya. Millions have been killed, maimed, made stateless, countries, completely destroyed. So it's absolutely critical that the biggest opposition possible is built to halt the US's illegal actions against Venezuela. The people of Venezuela and Latin America have the right to live in peace, to control their own resources and determine their future. Now, the UN Security General, Antonio Guterres, has stated that he is deeply concerned that the rules of international law have not been respected in this case. New York Mayor Zoran Adamni has called the capture of Maduro an act of war and a violation of federal and international law. Even Pope Leo has called for the guarantee of Venezuelan sovereignty, ensuring the rule of law is as is enshrined in its constitution. And where are we with Britain? It's effectively endorsing Trump's actions, talking about, being in favour of the transference of power away from Maduro. So basically, in effect, endorsing this regime change. Instead, what should our British government be doing? It should be, whilst it talks about supporting international law, it should be endorsing and supporting international law. So the British government should be denouncing the US actions, and it should be calling for the release of the Venezuelan people. So it's absolutely critical that we put the maximum amount of pressure on our government to do that. It's really important that people join us tomorrow at Downing Street for the protest. There will be a lot more actions going on after this, but join us tomorrow. It's absolutely vital that we join the rest of the world who are coming out against this horrific attack on Venezuela, because we understand how high the stakes are. As people have said, this is Venezuela now, but it could be other Latin Americans, and it could be other countries following this. And this is not the world that we want. This is not going to bring about peace. This is only going to drive it even further and further towards global war, a global war that could go nuclear. So that's why CND is so agitated about this, is why we see it as so serious, and why we are part of this coalition. So join us tomorrow and be part of this campaign. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sophie, and thanks for all the work that Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament continue to do, not just on this issue, but on a whole range of international issues. So we're going to move on to our next speaker. She's from the TSSA. She's the General Secretary, Mariam Eslamdout, who has already been very vocal about this situation online, and I know is very committed to international work. So we really appreciate you giving up your time this evening, Mariam. I know you're very busy, but thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Louise, and hello, everyone. Just coming back from Calais, so excuse me if my background or internet isn't ideal. But I'm actually shocked that I'm here again 6 months after Israel, backed by the US, bombed Iran unilaterally with no repercussions, no consequences, and barely a word from our so-called leaders. I'm back here again because something unthinkable has happened. Not that long ago, the idea that a US president could kidnap a leader of another sovereign country and expect the world to just shrug it off and move on has happened. What's really shocked me the most is the silence itself, the cowardice, the refusal of leaders from Europe, including here in Britain, to call this out clearly and loudly. Look, whatever your politics, whatever you think of Maduro, this is a violation of international law of the highest order. Why does it matter? Because international law cannot apply to some countries and not to others, because no country has the right to trample over another country's sovereignty, because those rules that were put in place after 2 world wars were meant to stop powerful states behaving like empires, pirates, or gangs. Trump tries to dress this up as being about drugs or crime. But even if that was true, and that's a big if, it is not a justification for acting like a gangster. And I don't use that word lightly, because if we accept this logic, then we should not be surprised when Putin kidnaps Zelensky, or if when someone turns around and jokes, as my mother-in-law did, well, wouldn't it be good if someone kidnaps Trump? We laugh, but that's the point. Once you tear up the rules, anything becomes fair game. Look, there are so many world leaders we despise. Yes, there are governments we oppose, but all of us, every country, every leader, are supposed to be bound by the same laws. And Trump cannot be allowed by silence or by complicity to bulldoze decades of international law that were meant to keep some kind of global stability. So let's not kid ourselves. This isn't about drugs. This isn't about democracy. This is about oil. This is about power. Because if Trump really cared about human rights or criminality, why isn't he touching the Saudi prince? Why not the rulers of the Emirates? Because we know what the answer is. Because they're allies, they're useful, because they're puppet states. And that's what Trump wants. And look, what can us progressives do? We have to explain these crimes simply, clearly, in language people can understand and relate to. And we have to pressure our leaders, because their silence is not neutral, it's approval. So today, like, if there's one thing that you can do, go and email Keir Starmer, call out his cowardice, question his so-called commitment to human rights. And if he's lying about those values, then that needs to be exposed. Thank you so much, Stop the War and CND, for organising this rally. And to everyone who showed up today, don't let it end here. Put pressure on your MP, put pressure on Yvette Cooper, put pressure on Keir Starmer, because if we allow pure aggression to become normal, if we allow international law to be optional, then make no mistake, one day it won't be Maduro, it won't be Iran or Venezuela. One day it could be you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mariam, and particularly thank you for joining us as you're traveling and taking time out, because I know it's very tricky, but a really important contribution. And please, Mariam's given you some things to do there. Make sure you do contact your own MP, but also contact Keir Starmer and others to call out what is happening and to ask them to oppose what is happening. We've got over 500 people in the room here, but we have got hundreds more watching on YouTube. So we know, as I said earlier, this is a really important issue for people. Just in terms of other things you can do, please, if you are not a member of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, make sure you join today. They need our support more than ever now. If you're in a trade union, make sure your trade union branch is affiliated. And share the link around to encourage other people to join the campaign. And if you can afford to, please do make a donation to them, because at the moment they really do need financial support in terms of the campaigning that they are doing. I'm going to go to our next speaker now, which is Tariq Ali. He's a writer. I'm sure he's very well known to everybody here in the room. So Tariq, over to you.
Thanks very much, Louise. I've got a bad cough, so forgive me for speaking in a slightly softer voice than I usually do. What has happened is appalling, but the one thing we should realize, it's not new. It has happened before. It happened in the 80s when the United States took out Noriega, their placeman in Panama, because he fell out with them. He was a CIA agent, ran drug cartels, but then he started upsetting some people, US people, who demanded that he be got rid of. So basically, they pulled him out of Panama, took him to the United States, tried him, and locked him up in prison. The second leader in the region, not far from Venezuela, they did the same too, with US backing, but it was the French who effectively carried this out, was to remove President Aristide from power in Haiti because he had had the nerve to demand that Haiti was no longer going to pay compensation to the French for having taken away, for having made a revolution and for having freed all the slaves. The French had insisted that Haiti pay back compensation for the property lost, i.e. slaves. This was going on till about 10, 15 years ago. So he was removed from that and sent off to South Africa till he was allowed to come back some years later. So this is dramatic only because we tend to forget what imperial powers have done in the past. Now, why did they do it? I think Trump is telling the truth. He said 5 times, we want our oil back. Our oil back. Why is it their oil? Because they had pro-US puppet governments in Venezuela who effectively set up with the oil companies, and that was taken away the interests of the people by the progressive governments that came in, and they now want that back. It's money. The US economy is not in a good way, contrary to what is often said, and they're trying to rake in the loot as much as they can and help their own families, especially in the case of Trump. So it is as simple as that on one level, the economic level. On a political level, they want the whole of South America back. They used to people it with dictators of one sort or another, vicious, evil, torturers. That has not happened in Venezuela for some time. And the reason they want Venezuela back is the oil, and they want a puppet state back where it used to be. They're making up now for all these errors the liberals made, so-called, and wanting the United States to exercise complete hegemony and control. And we're in a bad situation. We shouldn't look for sort of, light at the end of the tunnel. I hope it is there, but it's not there at the moment. We've lost Chile. Chile has been lost effectively to Pinochet supporters. The guy who's become president of Chile, his father or grandfather was a fascist who fought for the Third Reich, and then they fled to Chile after the war, that family. He's now, and he said that Pinochet is going to be restored, his image protected, etc. They did that in Argentina, where Trump poured in billions to make sure that Milei could pay certain bills for the country and win again. They've lost on Bolsonaro at the moment in Brazil, but they've got back Bolivia, where you have a right-wing government in power, likewise Ecuador. So it has been a gradual reversal of the pink tide of progressive governments, which has now reached its climax in the case of Venezuela. It's very positive, I think, and one has to say this, that Maduro, who I've met a number of times over the years, said no when they offered him money, said no when they offered him a palace in Turkey, said no when they suggested he could go anywhere he wanted. He said no. And that, I think, is positive because it gives the people of Venezuela, however many criticisms they had of him, a politician who in the end stood up for them and is defending them. So they've taken him to prison in Brooklyn. And if you read the charges that Pam Bondi, Trump's so-called Justice Supremo, has put against him, they are crazy. I kid you not. They are literally crazy. A, charging him with being the leader of a drug cartel. False. False. B, this is even worse than what I'm going to tell you now, is saying that Maduro carried weapons. Well, he was the bloody president of a country. Why shouldn't he carry weapons? Or why shouldn't his bodyguards have weapons? And that these weapons would have been used against the United States. Well, all I can say, I wish they had been. But they weren't. They captured him before there could be any armed fight back. So drugs and gun running. I mean, who will take this nonsense seriously? And I think the Democrats shouldn't be so supine. I mean, the New York Times has today come out with an editorial attacking what has happened in Venezuela. Small mercies, much, much better than this imbecile we have as Prime Minister here, Starmer. The Times' editorial is much better, but the same New York Times, who had the information a day and a half ago to the effect that this was the day, they got the documents from inside. Both the New York Times and the Washington Post saying tomorrow is the day Venezuela is going to be attacked, and they sat on them. Well, what sort of journalism is that? So now, of course, they can say it shouldn't have happened, but you could have played a part in stopping it from happening, and you didn't. As for the European leaders, they're effectively appeasers. You know, anything the United States does is more or less fine. They don't mind at all as long as they are left alone, which they aren't. So this is a situation. We don't know how it'll end. My own feeling is that what we will actually see is what they call the transition period, is a period before the next election that the US will move in a very big way. They're already saying, Trump has already said that it'll be run by us, and when asked by who, he pointed to Rubio, to Hexet, to himself, and a general who was part of the team. No parliamentary sanction at all for this action in the US Houses of Congress. They just didn't do it. They might have got away with it, but there would have been a debate, and they haven't done it. And I think that they will then want to put their own government directly in power, unless there's a huge resistance, which, to be perfectly frank, I don't see happening exactly at this point in time. So we're in a serious situation. What that means for our solidarity work is we carry on. We don't recognize the government. We tell MPs, the handful who are sympathetic to the Venezuelan cause, not to recognize this government, the new government the Americans will put into power sooner or later. In previous years, soon after Chavez came to power in Venezuela and instituted all the reforms, the largest number of MPs in the House of Commons belonging to a solidarity organization were Venezuela. Not all Labour, though Labour led by Colin Bergen at the time. He was very active in the Venezuelan solidarity, but they had about 60 or 70 MPs who were members of the VSC at the time, and I think there were a few Tories and Liberals as well who could see that what Chavez was doing was for Venezuela's benefit. So we are in a very early stage of this appalling gangster takeover of a country without any sanction from its own parliament, but with sanction from the Europeans who don't have the guts to say no, this is unsupportable. So we do what we always do, friends and comrades, we carry on fighting. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tarek. Thank you very much. Just to say this, we've still got hundreds in the room and hundreds watching on YouTube. So do keep sharing the link because there's still a few speakers that people can listen to. A reminder that there's an emergency picket tomorrow outside Downing Street at 6 p.m. So if you're able to get there, please do. Please make sure you wrap up warm. There is an event on Monday, the 19th of January. Trump's war on Venezuela, US hands off Latin America. So the registration link is also in the chat. I did encourage people to join the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign. I would also encourage all of you to join Stop the War and Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, both very important campaigns supporting not only this, but also campaigns around Palestine and many other issues that are happening globally. So please do make sure that you are members of those as well. Donate to them if you can afford to, and also make sure that you encourage your trade unions to be affiliated to those. Our next speaker is Francesca Emanuel. She's from Peru, but she's now based at the Center for Economic and Policy Research in the USA. I've heard Francesca speak previously. She's a very knowledgeable, excellent speaker on this issue. So we're really pleased you could join us. Francesca, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, yes, you can hear me, right? So yesterday, the United States illegally and unjustifiably bombed Venezuela, killing at least 40 people, including civilians and military personnel who were not engaged in any war, and abducted, as you have heard today, the country's head of state, Nicolás Maduro, along with his wife. This is a blatant violation of international law, and it is a direct assault of the principle of sovereignty recognized in the United Nations Charter and in the inter-American system. But more than that, it is imperialism. It is imperialism in its naked form, and for everyone should be considered cruel, immoral, and profoundly dangerous. That is why it was painful for me to read the reactions of political actors representing countries that claim to defend international law while failing to name the abduction of Maduro, failing to name the United States, and behaving as if these military attacks had occurred in a vacuum. So take the European Union, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs issued a statement reaffirming that Maduro lacks legitimacy and calling for peaceful transition without mentioning the US attack on Venezuela or the abduction of Maduro, while also invoking respect for international law and the UN Charter. So this is pure hypocrisy. And what we witnessed yesterday was a coup d'etat carried out through an external US military invasion, and without authorization from the US Congress and without any congressional notification. And this is not only unlawful under international law, but it is unconstitutional domestically in the US. So according to the US Constitution, the only body with the authority to approve offensive military actions, such as the ones we witnessed yesterday, is the US Congress. So many members of Congress already, primarily Democrats, but I have to say that some Republicans as well, have condemned these actions. And this week, they have announced that when the US Congress returns from recess, this starting week, two words powers resolution will be brought to a vote to halt further illegal and unjustified military actions and killings. And these resolutions reflect the position of the majority of people in the US who have expressed through several polls that were conducted in the past few months since the killings in the Caribbean started in September, that they reject regime change military action against Venezuela or against the government of Venezuela. So what has already happened that we saw yesterday is horrendous, but what may come next could be even worse. So President Trump and his team have openly suggested that a new wave of military attacks could follow in the current if the current government of Venezuela does not comply with their demands. And this has raised a very real possibility of what the people in the US call a forever war. Today, Marco Rubio, the head of the State Department, stated that the blockade against Venezuela will continue to use it as a leverage to pressure the government of Venezuela to do whatever they want. And an alarming part is this: they believe this imperial strategy is working, and that belief means that they are prepared to do it again. So another point before finishing is that one that maybe you already know, but we cannot afford to overlook, and is that this is not an isolated event. What we are witnessing is part of a broader strategy of domination pursued by the Trump administration across the region, reasserting U.S. hegemony through a revived Monroe Doctrine. And this strategy is grounded in the belief that the United States is superior to Latin America, and that our resources, when I say our, the resources of Latin Americans, are right to decide our own future, or even our lives belong to them, to the United States. This is extremely dangerous for the entire Western Hemisphere and for the world. So there's no ambiguity. When President Trump said yesterday that they were going to run Venezuela, he was openly stating a colonial intention. Trump has also threatened potential U.S. military action inside or against Mexico, against Colombia, and we are living through an extraordinary, dangerous moment. And as I said, as a strategy of renewed imperialism. And it falls to those of us living through this moment to confront it by calling these actions what they really are, rejecting them without ambiguity or half measures, holding our political leaders accountable, and permanently removing from the political arena those who chose or choose to comply with the criminal actions that the U.S. is taking against, at least for now, against the region. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Francesca. Excellent as always. They've just posted a link in the chat to Francesca's speech at the last meeting. If you weren't there or didn't get a chance to hear it, please do follow Venezuela Solidarity Campaign on Instagram, and you can look at all the speeches from the last meeting, but also they will be posting speeches from tonight as well on that channel. So please do make sure you're following their socials, and also obviously all the other socials of organisers of tonight, Stop the War and CND. So our next speaker is from Stop the War. She's the convener of Stop the War, Lindsay German, obviously supporting tonight's really important rally. We're really pleased you can be here with us, Lindsay. Thank you as always. I always seem to say this, for all the work that you do continuously and tirelessly. So you're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Louise. And thanks for everybody who's here. We in the Stop the War Coalition are very proud and very pleased to be part of this initiative tonight, and to be part of the protest that we have tomorrow, because like everybody, and all the speakers have already expressed this, I don't want to repeat it, the events of the last 2 days have been absolutely shocking in every respect, in terms of the absolute brutal kidnapping of a head of state of a sovereign country, the blatant ignoring of international law. And I would say as well, the kind of gangster-like approach to it. I mean, I know other US presidents have done this, but when you see pictures of Trump watching this whole operation from Mar-a-Lago, there's something, it reminds me a bit of when the Roman emperors watched the gladiators at the Colosseum. There's something absolutely brutal and horrible about it, as there is about the deliberate humiliation of Maduro and his wife, the pictures of him cuffed and not able to speak. Those things are very deliberate humiliations, which are very well known, as people will be aware, in the whole history of imperial powers and the way that they treat countries that they think they can dominate and that they can control. But I think this is a new development, not because it's the first time, as Tarek said, we've already had the situation with Noriega, but it's certainly a very, very shocking development of its scale and the fact that they are obviously continuing to try to, as Trump has said, to try to control and to run Venezuela, which they have absolutely no right to do. So I think this is a development which is important for us to see, and it's a development we can see coming out of the National Defense Strategy, coming out from Trump's restatement of the Monroe Doctrine, and the idea that they want to have regime change, obviously in Venezuela, but also clearly in Cuba, as well as in other parts of the world. But I think for us in Stop the War, we also want to link this with some of the things that are going on elsewhere in the world. Firstly, a word about Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, who every time he's been questioned about Venezuela since this coup, he has looked as though he's a rabbit frightened in the headlights, and who has been incapable of condemning, as he should, this appalling act of piracy and gangsterism that we're seeing. And when you consider that, you look at Starmer's response. He says, on the one hand, we wanted Maduro to go, but on the other hand, we fully support international law and we don't think international law should be broken. How can you reconcile those two positions in one statement? You cannot, because the truth is that they forced Maduro out by military action, and that is something which is completely contrary to international law. And the truth is about Starmer and about Macron and about Merz and all the other European leaders is that they are appeasers of Trump. They don't like Trump. They're frightened of Trump. He keeps putting pressure on them. He keeps encouraging the far right parties, which are growing across Europe. But at the same time, they will do absolutely nothing to stand up to him. And I think one of our tasks here in Britain, and obviously it's true for comrades in other countries around the world, to put pressure on their own governments, that we have to put pressure on our own government, which thinks it has a special relationship with the United States, but actually that special relationship is absolutely one of craven obedience to whatever Trump wants to do. And we have to challenge that in every way that we can. We also have to see that this as part of a wider system of imperialism. I noticed in the chat people said, can't the UN do anything? And the truth is, when you look at what has happened to the post-Second World War settlement and the UN, whatever its failings then, since the end of the Cold War, since particularly the wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, the intervention in Libya, in Syria, and the support for the Israeli genocide in Gaza, we're seeing a great deal more weakness of the UN and any attempt to try and introduce any cohesion over international law. We're also seeing much greater instability in the world. And this is part of what is going on with the crisis of imperialism, and actually the crisis of the loss of US hegemony worldwide over recent decades, and the way that Trump is responding to this. We have had bombing of Iran, of Syria, of Lebanon, of Nigeria, of support for the Gaza genocide, and now Venezuela, all in a matter of months. And this is what we're talking about all the time. We also have an arms race which is going on across Europe as Trump tries to force the European powers, who are doing so willingly, to spend more and more of their money on militarism and arms. So we have a huge crisis here. And I think that it's one that we want, firstly, to show solidarity with the Venezuelan people and to oppose what has happened to Maduro and condemn it in the strongest possible terms. We also want to build a movement which can challenge imperialism and challenge what it's doing, whether it's in Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, which is obviously in Trump's sights. And therefore, the role of campaigning against war, the role of Stop the War and CND and the role of Venezuela Solidarity has to be not just to object to this, but actually to see this as a phase of imperialism, which is more dangerous, which is more unstable. The world is heading towards war, and we have to do everything we can to build that. So please be there tomorrow. We've talked about the London demonstrations, but there's loads of demonstrations around the country, in Bristol, in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Manchester, Birmingham. Lots and lots are going on. So please look up. They're on the Stop the War website. Have a look on there. Please do join a demonstration tomorrow if you can. But this should be the start of a campaign, a mass campaign against our government and its allied governments in order to end this drive to war. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Lindsay. And I was just going to point out all those other demonstrations. So you've done that very nicely for me. But Lindsay has posted something in the chat. So if you didn't hear that or didn't catch all the ones that are available, just check out the link in the chat, which gives all of those other demonstrations up and down the country if you can't make it to the London demonstration. Okay, I'm going to move to our next speaker. It's Jeremy Corbyn, MP, who really needs no introduction from me, I'm sure. But you have obviously already been very outspoken about what has happened. You are always on the right side of history as far as I see it, and we're very pleased that you can be here with us to speak about the situation.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you all those that organised this call at very short notice today, and for those that will turn out tomorrow night and what will be a very cold night in Whitehall. But it's important those of us can get there, do get there, and make our voice clearly heard. Obviously, like everyone else, I was completely shocked by what we saw on television and what we heard was going on yesterday. The way in which the US went into Caracas, grabbed Maduro and his wife and took them to the USA. And as Lindsay was describing, in the sort of Roman Empire way of doing things, they've now brought this man in chains virtually to the presence of the great Emperor Trump to show how powerful the USA is. And there is no pretense here that international law has been observed or followed. There's no pretense here there's anything legal about this. There was no pretense that there was anything legal about the bombing of fishing vessels or any other kind of vessels. No pretense whatsoever. And it is important that all of us understand where the Trump administration is going and how the world is headed. I spent part of Christmas cheering myself up by reading this document in full, in detail. And I read it very carefully. It's the National Security Strategy of the USA, authored by Trump in November 2025. And it is well written. It's very clear. And in that sense, it's very honest because it actually lays out exactly what the USA thinks. And it thinks this under Trump. One, everything that matters in the world is only important if it matters to the USA. Secondly, the USA's interests, defined by Trump as the corporate interests of America, come first in all respects on all international policy. Thirdly, that they require a supply of raw materials, particularly rare earths and critical minerals from all around the world. And if anybody has those and the USA needs them, then the USA will deploy all measures necessary to ensure they're supplied to them. And then it goes on to divide the world up into spheres, and they predominant with the Western Hemisphere, that is North and South America and the Caribbean, and say that the Monroe Doctrine needs updating to be called the Trump-Monroe Doctrine or the Monroe-Trump Doctrine, whichever way you want to put it, which gives them the right to decide on the international relations and foreign policy of every country within that hemisphere, gives them the right to intervene if they think there is a foreign influence having inordinate effect on those particular countries, to go in and, if necessary, militarily to sort things out. And so this is something the US has been doing for a very long time in Latin America. Think Guatemala, 1954, think Chile, 1973, think Dominican Republic, 1965, think Brazil, 1964, and so on. Think also the arrest of Noriega, who was actually a CIA asset, who was imposed on Panama, but became a bit too popular and a bit too supportive of Nicaragua and other countries. So he was removed and ended up in prison in the USA. And so they've done that to Maduro and taken him in. And so it is this strategy that is being followed. They also say the same about African countries. They completely, the strategy completely dismisses Europe as a place full of regulation and wokeism, and they don't really want anything to do with it anymore, and that European foreign policy initiatives are not relevant to the USA and not of any great interest to them. And so what we have is the situation where the US has given itself these enormous powers. And so you then ask yourself, what do we do about it? Do we just accept the US has this overweening power which will take over any country in the world, arrest any president they don't like, and move on from that? Or are we moving into a sort of 1984 situation of, as in the book, of three great powers around the world? Because Trump does not challenge, particularly in the strategy, the power of Russia or of China, except where there's a conflict with American interests. And so he sees himself as the world's great negotiator between the three big influences in the world. That's China, Russia, and the United States. He completely ignores Europe in all of this, and that he will throw his weight around with the very advanced military that they have, military equipment that they absolutely have. And so you then ask, well, what do we do about it? First of all, you've got to understand what this power is about and understand the direction in which the world is going, and understand that none of this deals with the real issues facing the world. The issue of environmental destruction, the issue of global inequality and desperate poverty of large numbers of people, the issue of human rights abuses around the world, and the issue of the refugee flows created by the human rights abuses and the poverty of the world. Nothing in the Trump strategy addresses any of those issues as they walk away from any global institution and any global system. And so it is about our unity with people in other parts of the world, and it is about political leaders speaking out. So it is about building the closest possible contacts with the left all across Latin America, albeit many of them are under the cosh at the present time, but they've been under the cosh before and they've come back and survived even better. So let's build those links and make sure that Latin American Solidarity Conference coming up soon is very big and very effective. Let's make sure that's the case. And then what we do in our own country, what we do in our own society is what matters. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, started off by saying he didn't know enough about the situation. I don't know what he needed to know that he didn't know already. It was pretty bloody obvious what had happened. And so he didn't go beyond that at the beginning and said he needed to speak to President Trump. I'm not clear if he ever spoke to President Trump since yesterday or not. I've no idea. So we then have him saying, well, international law has to be respected. Well, if it does have to be respected, then you don't support people that break international law. You don't break international law yourself. International law requires that you recognize that when a genocide takes place, you don't fuel the fire of that genocide. His government has done exactly that by the provision of arms to Israel, knowing full well that Israel had already been called out for committing acts of genocide in Gaza and for their attack on civilian targets in the West Bank and other war crimes that have been committed. And so Starmer saying that this is within international law is utter and complete nonsense. He knows, everybody knows, that it is completely illegal to go into a country for regime change. That was illegal in Iraq. It's illegal in Venezuela. So it's up to us to stand up in protest. It's up to us to understand the global situation, but above all, to build a global movement that will deal with the issues that people face. I mentioned them: environmental destruction. I mentioned them: human rights abuse. I mentioned them: human inequality across the world. And also the global power of corporations. And I'll finish with this point. Trump said he's going to make Venezuela safe for American global oil companies. The alleged leader of the Venezuelan opposition put out a video, a quite chilling video, saying that she was going to make the country ready for privatization. I was thinking to myself, on an even greater scale than Boris Yeltsin did in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. What we're really up against here is global corporate interests working through politicians like Trump in order to use the military to create opportunities for themselves. We know which side we're on. We know which side of history we're on. We know which side of history is going to be found out for those people that supported this illegal act. See you there tomorrow if you can come along, but be as active as you possibly can. And the Peace and Justice Project will be holding a further discussion probably on Thursday evening, which will be quite a detailed discussion on foreign policy and foreign policy initiatives centered on Venezuela, but not exclusively on Venezuela, on the wider issues of foreign policy, which I've outlined in my contribution tonight. Sorry to go over my time, Louise, but thank you very much for inviting me, and well done, everybody, for being on the call.
No problem. Thank you very much, Jeremy, as always, for a very comprehensive, contribution there. And thanks for all the work you do as an MP, but also through the Peace and Justice Project. And just a reminder, there are lots of links coming up in the chat. So people that haven't looked at the chat, please do have a look. There's lots of things there, particularly around donating, affiliating to the organisations that have set up this event tonight, but also things that you can get involved with. So please do check those out. We are on to our last two speakers. So the next speaker is Bernard Regan. He is the National Secretary of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign. You're very welcome, Bernard. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you to all the previous speakers. Can I begin by expressing Cuba Solidarity's campaign's support for the initiatives of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign. We work together on many issues, and of course we're fully committed to working together on this, because it is, as people have said, about Venezuela principally and first and foremost, but it is also about the whole of the Western Hemisphere. In 2018, Trump made very clear at the United Nations General Assembly that for him, the guiding principles of US policy in respect of the Western Hemisphere was the Monroe Doctrine of 1823. So we should not be surprised that he's reiterating this, as Tariq and Jeremy and other speakers have mentioned earlier. In the recent strategy document that they produce, there's a reaffirmation of their intention to regard the whole of the Western Hemisphere as their backyard. And it's not surprising, because since the Second World War, since 1945, the United States has intervened in between 20 and 24 different countries in terms of direct military intervention, in terms of carrying out coups, in terms of derailing progressive movements that have been trying to seek change and bring about change in that region. And it's not surprising, therefore, that in response to what is happening in Venezuela, that the Cuban government have been very firm in the stance that they have taken. And if I may, I'll just read a short extract from their statement, which they've issued, because I think it is important, as people have said. People like Marco Rubio have already been talking about Cuba as the next intended target for the kind of intervention that they've made in Venezuela. And the Cubans said the following: the revolutionary government condemns in the strongest possible terms the military aggression carried out by the United States against Venezuela, while categorically reaffirming Cuba's absolute support and solidarity with the sister Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and its government. The international community cannot allow an aggression of this nature and gravity against the United Nations member state to go unpunished, nor permit the military abduction of the legitimate and sitting president of a sovereign country without consequences. Venezuela is a peaceful nation that has not attacked the United States or any other country. For that sister nation and its people, we, that is Cuba, we are prepared to give, as we would for Cuba, even our own blood. All nations of the region must remain alert as the threat hangs over all. In Cuba, our determination to struggle is firm and unwavering. The decision is one and only one. Homeland or death, we shall overcome. That's the statement from the Cubans, who are absolutely clear of the potential implications of what is happening in Venezuela, absolutely intransigent in their support. And it's about the defense of sovereignty. And it's about, although people have talked about oil and gold and the rare earth minerals that are present in Latin America, and that is very clear from statements by people like Laura Richardson, the former head of the United States Southern Command, and Admiral Alvin Halsey, who's the current head of the US Southern Command, that is kind of their perspective. In other words, the perspective for Latin America from the point of view US is not only written by the White House, it's written by the Pentagon, and it's written by Wall Street. It's all of those combined who are looking to develop US interests in terms of the region. And it's in part, and I think this is perhaps something we haven't reflected on too much tonight, but clearly has to be taken into account. And that is the fact that 21 nations in the Latin American region have signed agreements with the Belt and Road Initiative of China. So the US clearly sees this assault on Venezuela as part of its attempt to kind of reorientate and hegemonize and dominate in the region, just in the same way that it is doing in the West Asia area of the Arab world, where it's seeking to impose on people the Abraham Accords as a way of expressing a commitment and a subservience to US imperialism's interests, carried out, in my view, by Israel and acting as its agent within the area. So it's a grave and serious situation that we face. Clearly, Starmer is implicated in this. The British government still holding $2 billion worth of gold that belongs to the Venezuelan people. And actually, his statements have been outrageous, as has most of the British media. And I think we should invite people to respond to the outrageous attacks that are made in the media and the caricature of what is happening, trying to portray it as a question of a war on drugs, a war on cartels. It's not. It's a war on the Venezuelan people and the right to defend their sovereignty and the right to defend their future. It's important, I think, not only in terms of kind of defending Venezuela and Cuba and the region, but it's about the kind of political values that we want to see in this country. And what we're witnessing is a government that's completely subservient to the imperialist wishes of the United States of America, whether it's in relation to Palestine and the Middle East, or whether it's in relation to Latin America. So I hope people will come on the demonstration on Monday evening. We'll mobilize for that. We'll put resolutions through their union branches, and in whatever forum they're able to raise their voices for the defense of the Venezuelan people. And I hope that people will, in conjunction with Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, Stop the War, CND, and everybody who's collaborating on this initiative, consider organizing meetings in their localities to amplify the voice, to call for a mass movement in support of the people of Venezuela. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bernard. Very comprehensive as always. And it's always very good to hear from our colleagues in Cuba. We know that their solidarity globally is wide ranging. So very pleased that you could share what they had said. So our final speaker tonight is Francisco Domingue. He's the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign National Secretary. I'm sure he's going to be able to sum up really well what has happened this evening, but also tell us what we need to do going forward. So I'll hand the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Luis, and great to have this meeting, particularly at this time, difficult time for everyone, particularly the people in Venezuela. It is absolutely shocking and outrageous that the United States organized these military attacks and extricated invert commas, the president of the country and take it away, and then he begins to blackmail the Venezuelan nation with further military action, where, if they don't accept and they don't submit, which is absolutely terrible. But I want to deal with something which is in the sort of background of the conversation, but not necessarily being clarified. The charges of narco-terrorism and drug trafficking are completely false. Tariq already said this. But we have information from the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, which year after year after year, for many years now, has actually clarified completely this. Number one, the contribution of Venezuela to the traffic of fentanyl is zero. That's number one. Number two, according to them, between 87 to 92% of the cocaine which reaches the United States, which is produced in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, reaches the United States through the Pacific. Venezuela has no coastline in the Pacific. And they add the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, that something between 5 to 7% approximately tries to make it to the Caribbean through the territory of Venezuela, but not necessarily with the consent of Venezuela, and a proportion of it is seized by the authorities. Moreover, the United Nations Office on Drug and Crimes insists, and they certify this, year after year after year, that there are no illegal cultivations in Venezuela, and even more, there are no laboratories producing cocaine. So these accusations, what Pambondi is accusing the president of Venezuela and his wife, Celia Flores, are completely false, totally made up. And I think they need this. And to suggest on top of that, that the Venezuelan state is a narco-terrorist state is even worse, particularly mentioning a cartel which does not exist, Cartel de los Soles, which if you look at the report from the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, is not mentioned. If you look at the reports of the DEA, this cartel is not mentioned either. So where is it? And how come that is so powerful? That's number one. Number two, I think all of this taking place within the context of a severe decline by the United States economy and politics. If you were to look at the shenanigans that go on with the politics of the cabinet of Trump and what he's been doing to his own population, mobilizing troops, deploying the federal troops in various cities in order to attack them, to intimidate the population, plus the persecution of the Latino population in particular, but not exclusively, also immigrants of every kind, with terror by these organizations, which is sort of paramilitary organization, is very violent, called ICE, that brutalizes people absolutely everywhere and committing every kind of abuse. Plus, his blatant violation of internal, constitutional law, constitutional principle, and so on in the United States itself. The key for me to understand is that there is a section of the United States oligarchy, or the United States ruling class, to use a more conventional term, which is expressing this national security strategy. Doesn't mean to say that all of the elite agrees, but the key ones, I think they do, because they've been practicing this for some time. The difference this time round is in the past they disguised this with arguments such as democracy, human rights, and so on. Now it's totally blatant. He doesn't care anymore. I think they are drawing the conclusion, this section of the oligarchy, which Trump expresses, they've drawn the conclusion the only way they can maintain their supremacy in the world is by military might. There is no other possibility. The US economy is more or less broken. The level of poverty is growing all the time. The level of wealth concentration is so high, so incredibly high, that makes the whole economy non-viable. And his participation in the world economy is so twisted, so quirky, that actually produces very bad results for the economy. And his tariffs are making the whole thing much worse. So regardless, they say they're going to go for it. And you can see that this particular attitude, this particular position is being expressed regularly again and again and again every year. by the Southern Command, which when they come to the Senate or the commission of the Armed Services Committee, where the Southern Command, Commander-in-Chief, has to present the report to them. And every time they've been arguing all sorts of things, and lately they say that the main problem is that there are unfair competitors that represent an existential threat to the security of the United States that come from outside to actually take control of the key assets, key resources such as lithium, such as gold, such as oil, and so on. And they are prepared, the Southern Command has been arguing, consistently that they need to do something very serious about it. The opportunity is now, because the longer it takes, the worse it's going to become. So what Trump has done by calling the updating of the Monroe Doctrine the Trump corollary is exactly what Theodore Roosevelt did in between 1901 and 1909, and also the United States, at that time, which was gun-boat diplomacy. I'm going to discipline you by military invading you if you don't like what we do. They invaded the Dominican Republic at the time. They invaded Haiti at the time. They controlled the countries for a long time. They invaded Cuba and so on. So the Trump corollary makes it totally explicit. We are not going to accept, and we're not going to tolerate that what they call rogue regimes or authoritarian regimes in Latin America, in the Western Hemisphere, enter into contract with authoritarian regimes from outside to enter into contract to take control of assets, which they say it belongs to them because it's their terrain. They call it nicely these days our neighborhood. They used to call it the backyard, now they call it our neighborhood. So that's what it is, and it's so blatant. It's really incredible to see that it's so blatant. In other words, that section of the ruling class has drawn the conclusion they're going to go for it. I do not know how strongly these represent the whole of the ruling class in there, because what is being done to Venezuela is very significant. Number one, the significance for Venezuela is going to, by this pressure, the intention is to turn Venezuela into a vassal state, which will be dominated by the United States. It will become a colony, really. And the oil is the real purpose of it. The significance for the Caribbean is even worse. The Caribbean is small islands, the largest one being Cuba, then there is the Dominican Republic, then there is Puerto Rico, then there is all the other islands, which are very small and extremely vulnerable. So what was done to Venezuela can be done to any of them. I do not know who is next. But the military in the United States have the concept of the unsinkable with S aircraft carrier. That is to say, they take control of an island, it becomes a sort of aircraft carrier of them, and nobody is safe in the neighborhood. Nobody. And this can apply and will be applied to every other country in the rest of the continent, which is extremely dangerous and extremely problematic. Therefore, there is going to be a huge amount of resistance. And as somebody said, I think it was Lindsay mentioned that, they can come to any place, even in Europe, if that's the case. However, and this is where our campaign comes in, there is massive opposition in the world. It's really gigantic. I mean, already I've seen in the chat, people reporting demonstrations in all cities in the UK. I've been following developments in Europe, and the amount of demonstrations and the size of demonstrations in places such as Barcelona, Madrid, in Italy, in 6 cities, Rome, Milano, and so on and so forth, let alone in Latin America and in many other places, is growing all the time. It's huge. It's really huge. I've never seen such a degree of opposition to something like what the United States is done now, because it's done in the past several times. And interesting, there is substantial opposition inside the United States. Very, very substantial. This is not only all of the Democrats, from Jack Schumer all the way down to the last person. They're consistently on the media saying this is completely ridiculous. We don't want to go into a war with Venezuela and so on. I think some of the reasons are because some of them are extremely worried about the damage that these actions by the Trump administration is doing to the prestige of the United States and to the alliances that the United States used to have He doesn't seem to care about that anymore. And, they think, even in the Republican Party, they are aware that Trump is not going to last forever, and possibly is not going to be running for the next election, which is in 3 years. So therefore, they're extremely worried. That's one reason. There are others who are, completely against it for moral reasons as well as for political reasons, because every time a country of such as the United States enter into a war, particularly when you think about the Middle East, the masses of problems that it creates for the United States when the soldiers come back, as well as for the exchequer, for the finances of the country, are extremely bad. And we need to ensure that we campaign really, really hard on all of these, make sure that everybody knows about it, participate in our activities, certainly in the picket tomorrow. But one thing I think is very important to emphasize, that certainly from my point of view, every time we make a statement, every time we make a speech, every time we engage in a conversation about the situation in Venezuela, we must insist on the immediate and unconditional release of Nicolas Maduro and his wife at once. Interestingly, the foreign ministry of China has made such a statement, which appeared in Global Times, with the following title: China calls on US to release President Nicolas Maduro and his wife at once. This is very precise and very sharp. Normally, Chinese are quite gentle when it comes to international pronouncement, but on this occasion, they've been very sharp. So I imagine, I hope I'm right, that this demand for the release of President Maduro, who is being tried on fake arguments, on false charges, but also is being taken illegally in every possible way, in the most flagrant way, is something that is going to be quite an important point of campaign for us. So please support what we do and insist, put pressure on the Prime Minister here, because the Prime Minister in the UK, as well as many heads of state in Europe, had the constitutional and moral responsibility to uphold international law, not to cow to the powerful gangster that exists in Washington. So do help us, sign the statement, participate in our activities, join the campaign, and make sure that Maduro is returned safe and sound to Venezuela, where it belongs, and retakes the position as president of that country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that summarizing at the end of the meeting. I want to say a massive thank you to all of our speakers tonight. They've all been fantastic, very informative, and they've all given you lots of ideas of things that you can do now going forward. Just a few reminders. Tomorrow there is the demonstration in London at Downing Street at 6 p.m. But if you can't attend that one, Linda's posted a link to others up and down the country. So do check out the Stop the War website. Make sure you've signed the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign statement. Over 5,000 people have already signed that. Make sure you join and affiliate to Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, to Stop the War, to CND. I have to say, a significant number of people during this meeting have joined the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign. So please, let's double those numbers. Let's triple those numbers. When you get off the call, make that the first thing that you do, please. Please affiliate and join these campaigns. They're really important in the work that we are doing going forward. But all of our speakers have talked about this. We cannot be silent. We cannot allow our government to continue their complicity globally in the things that are happening. We have to be out on the streets fighting and campaigning. So please get involved. Please keep fighting. Thank you for staying on the call, and solidarity